The greatest country songs sound like diary entries set to a steel guitar. That's because they often were. From Hank Williams to Johnny Cash, many stars battled demons far bigger than any heartache they sang about. We're exploring the hidden history of country music's relationship with trouble, revealing the struggles that inspired the genre's most unforgettable and sorrowful tunes. 1. Hank Williams. Before anyone was a king or an outlaw, there was Hank Williams. He was a skinny kid from Alabama with a voice that sounded like it knew every secret heartache the world had to offer. When he sang, people listened. His songs about cheating hearts, lost highways, and inconsolable blues weren't just clever rhymes. They were raw, honest, and powerful. He became country music's first true superstar in the late 1942, a titan of the legendary Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. To the world, he was on top of the world. But behind the scenes, he was falling apart. Hank was born with a painful back condition that haunted him his entire life. To deal with the constant, grinding pain, he turned to two things: the bottle and the cures offered by doctors. In those days, medical men were quick to offer powerful liquids and pills to ease a man's suffering. For Hank, these supposed remedies offered a temporary escape, a moment of peace from his physical and emotional turmoil. The more famous he became, the more he relied on them. The pressure to write the next hit, to perform for thousands of adoring fans, and to be the great Hank Williams was immense. The drink and the doctor's relief became his crutches. His behavior grew erratic. He would show up to performances in no condition to sing, or sometimes he wouldn't show up at all. The very institution that made him a star, the Grand Ole Opry, eventually had to cast him out for his unreliability. He died in the back of a car on New Year's Day in 1953. He was only 29 years old. His heart, strained by a lifestyle of constant pain, pressure, and self-medication, finally gave out. He became the first great ghost of country music, a chilling warning about the price of fame on the genre's biggest and most unforgiving stage. 2. The Mother Church and its crushing weight. For a country singer in the mid-20th century, all roads led to one place: the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, home of the Grand Ole Opry. It was more than just a stage, it was a cathedral. They called it the Mother Church of country music. Getting a spot on the Opry meant you had truly made it. It was the ultimate validation, a sign that you belonged among the legends. This powerful dream created a pressure cooker environment unlike any other. Artists would do anything to get there and, once they arrived, do anything to stay. This intense pressure created a world of hidden struggles. The lifestyle was grueling. Performers would drive hundreds of miles from a small-town gig just to make their Saturday night spot on the Opry broadcast. They were expected to be perfect, to smile for the cameras, and to deliver a flawless performance every single time. For many, the only way to cope with the exhaustion, the stage fright, and the loneliness of the road was to find help in a bottle or a pill. Hank Williams was the most famous casualty of this pressure, but he was far from the only one. Many artists learned to wear a mask. They would put on their spangled suits, step into the sacred circle of wood on the Opry stage, and sing songs about faith and family, all while fighting a desperate private war. The culture demanded perfection, and showing weakness was not an option. Asking for help was seen as a failure. So they suffered in silence, creating a legacy of beautiful music born from quiet desperation. One young singer with a booming, deep voice would soon arrive, an artist who would walk that same fiery line, battling his demons in the spotlight for all the world to see. 3. Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash is an artist who seemed to be carved from American granite. With his deep, rumbling voice and his steady, chugging guitar, he sounded like the voice of truth itself. He famously wore black to represent the poor and the downtrodden, a symbol of his solidarity with the common man. But in the late 1952nd and through the 62nd, the man in black persona was also fueled by something much darker. The life of a touring musician was a relentless grind of endless highways, cheap motels, and show after show. To survive it, Cash and his band turned to a certain kind of pep pill. These stay-awake tablets were everywhere at the time. Truck drivers used them, students used them, and musicians swore by them. They gave you a jolt of artificial energy that could keep you going for days. For Johnny Cash, they became a central part of his life. The pills gave him the energy to perform his wild, high-energy shows night after night, but they also began to warp his personality. He became unpredictable, paranoid, and prone to fits of destructive behavior. His concerts became legendary for their chaotic energy. No one knew what he might do. He was arrested several times, his health began to fail, and he nearly lost his career. The man who sang with such authority about walking the line was, in his own life, swerving all over the road. His dark days were a perfect example of the musician's trap. The very thing he thought he needed to do his job was the thing that was destroying his life. He was heading for a cliff, and it would take the love of a very strong woman to even try to pull him back from the edge. 4. June Carter and the Redemption Song. Every great story of a fall needs a story of redemption. For Johnny Cash, that redemption had a name: June Carter. June came from country music royalty, the legendary Carter family. She was a talented singer, songwriter, and comedian in her own right, and she was a woman of immense strength and unshakable faith. She met Johnny during his wildest years, when the pep pills had their tightest grip on him. She saw the good man buried beneath the chaos and made it her mission to save him. This was not a simple Hollywood love story. It was a long, hard fight. June stood by Johnny through his worst moments. She confronted him about his choices. She flushed his pills down the toilet, and she prayed for him endlessly. She and her family moved into his house to help him through the terrible process of withdrawal, a painful and agonizing experience. She refused to give up on him, even when he gave up on himself. Her love was tough, determined, and absolute. It was her belief in him that finally gave him the strength to choose a different path. When he finally got clean in the late 1962nd, he credited her entirely. He proposed to her on stage, and their love story became one of the most iconic in all of music history. June's steadfastness didn't just save a man, it saved a legend. Her story provided a glimmer of hope in the often dark world of country music, showing that recovery was possible. But while Johnny Cash had found his angel, another titan of the genre was about to begin a long, slow dance with the devil in the bottle, a battle that would nearly cost him the greatest voice country music had ever heard. 5. George Jones. If country music had a Sistine Chapel, the ceiling would be painted by George Jones's voice. Many believe he was, quite simply, the greatest pure singer in the history of the genre. He could convey more emotion in a single syllable than most singers could in an entire album. He was a master of phrasing, a vocal acrobat who could make you feel every ounce of joy, or more often, every ounce of heartbreak in a song. He was known as the Possum, and he was a living legend. He was also, for much of his life, a man in a desperate struggle with a powerful thirst. George Jones's battle with the bottle was as legendary as his voice. His drinking led to behavior that was both comical and tragic. There's the famous story of his wife hiding his car keys to keep him from driving to the liquor store, only to have George ride his sit-down lawnmower 10 miles into town instead. While it sounds funny, the reality was bleak. His dependence on that old familiar spirit, and later on other harmful powders, caused him to become wildly unreliable. He earned the nickname No-Show Jones because he missed hundreds of concerts, often disappearing for days at a time. Promoters went broke betting on him, and fans were left disappointed. His life was a series of dramatic ups and downs, of failed marriages, financial ruin, and countless attempts to get sober. His talent was so immense that the industry forgave him time and time again, always hoping the genius would win out over the demons. For decades, it was an open question which one would. This struggle took place as a new, glamorous temptation was sweeping through the Nashville music scene. 6. The Nashville party scene and its powder. The 1972nd and early 82nd were a time of big money and big excess in Nashville. Country music was crossing over into the pop charts, and the artists were becoming wealthy, international superstars. With that fame and fortune came a new kind of party favor, an expensive white powder that was becoming the ultimate status symbol for the rich and famous all across America. In Nashville, this party powder found a welcoming home in the high-stakes world of recording studios, tour buses, and backstage parties. This substance promised a quick burst of confidence and energy. It made people feel like they were on top of the world, invincible. For musicians dealing with the insecurities and pressures of the industry, that promise was incredibly tempting. Artists who had once only struggled with the bottle now had a new and far more insidious partner in crime. George Jones's troubles famously escalated during this period, but he was not alone. The powder became woven into the fabric of the high-flying Nashville lifestyle. It fueled all-night songwriting sessions and wild post-show parties. But the high was short-lived, and the crash was brutal, leaving users feeling empty and craving more. It created a culture of paranoia and secrecy, and it burned through artists' fortunes with alarming speed. It was a deceptive dust that promised glamour but often delivered ruin, adding another layer of danger to the already perilous life of a country music star, especially for those who lived by a rebellious code. 7. Waylon Jennings and the Outlaws' Fuel. By the mid-1972nd, a group of artists in Nashville had grown tired of the slick, polished sound of mainstream country. They wanted to make music their own way, with a raw, more rock and roll edge. This was the birth of the outlaw movement, and its undisputed leader was Waylon Jennings. With his black leather vest, rugged beard, and defiant attitude, Waylon was the epitome of the country rebel. He fought the Nashville establishment for creative control and won, creating some of the most iconic music of the era. But his outlaw image wasn't just for show, it was fueled by a real-life, high-octane habit. Like Johnny Cash before him, Waylon relied heavily on pep pills to survive the brutal demands of touring. He needed the energy to lead his band and deliver his powerful performances night after night. As his fame and fortune grew, he added the expensive Nashville party powder to the mix, developing a massive and costly dependence. He was the ultimate outlaw, living life in the fast lane with little regard for the consequences. He was famous for his wild temper and his distrust of authority, an attitude that was magnified by the substances he used. His story represents the core contradiction of the outlaw movement. The very things that fueled the rebellious, creative energy were also the things that were tearing him down. He was living the life he sang about, but he was paying a heavy price for it, trapped by an image he had created and a lifestyle that was nearly impossible to escape. 8. The Outlaw Code. The outlaw movement was more than just a musical style. It was a philosophy. It was about authenticity, about rejecting the clean-cut Nashville suits, and about living life on your own terms. Its heroes like Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Merle Haggard, and David Allan Coe celebrated a hard-living, independent spirit. Their songs were about drinking, rambling, and telling the boss to take a hike. This created an incredibly powerful and romantic image, but it also created a dangerous trap. The Outlaw Code implicitly suggested that showing vulnerability was a weakness. In this world, admitting you had a problem or asking for help went against the entire tough guy persona. How could a rebel who sang about being unafraid of anyone admit that he was being beaten by a powder or a pill? This culture of rugged individualism often led to a vow of silence about personal struggles. Artists felt they had to live up to the myth they had helped create. This meant that many of them suffered in isolation, believing they had to fight their battles alone. Willie Nelson famously managed his choices in a way that didn't destroy him, but for others, the pressure to be a real outlaw meant pushing their bodies and minds to the absolute limit. It was a brotherhood built on a shared defiance of the rules, but that same defiance made it incredibly difficult for anyone to step out of line and say, "I'm not okay." One of the movement's greatest poets, however, found a way to turn his troubled past into art without letting it be his final chapter. 9. Merle Haggard. Merle Haggard was a true outlaw long before it was a musical genre. He had a genuinely rough upbringing and spent time in San Quentin prison as a young man after a botched robbery attempt. When he saw Johnny Cash perform at the prison, it inspired him to turn his life around and pursue music. Unlike some of his outlaw peers whose rebellion was a reaction to the Nashville system, Merle's music came from a place of deep, lived experience. He was the poet of the common man, writing songs that gave voice to the struggles of working-class people. Merle's relationship with substances was complex. He drank, and he was open about his use of other things, but he never seemed to be quite as consumed by them as some of his contemporaries. Perhaps his time in prison gave him a different perspective on freedom and self-destruction. He knew what it was like to truly hit bottom, and he seemed determined not to go back. His struggles were real, but he channeled them into his art with a kind of clear-eyed honesty. Songs like Mama Tried and Sing Me Back Home weren't just about his own pain, they were about understanding the pain of others. He represented a different kind of outlaw, one who had already been broken by the world and was now using his music to piece himself and his listeners back together. He was a survivor, a man who looked his demons in the eye and wrote a song about them instead of letting them sing his eulogy. But not every songwriter from that era would be so fortunate. 10. Townes Van Zandt. While artists like Waylon and Willie were becoming massive stars, a different kind of legend was being forged in the smoky folk clubs and dive bars of Texas. His name was Townes Van Zandt, and many of the greatest songwriters in the world considered him to be their master. He wrote songs of such breathtaking beauty and profound sadness that they seemed to be channeled from another world. His lyrics were pure poetry, filled with images of lonely highways, desperate characters, and a longing for a peace that always seemed out of reach. The tragedy of Townes Van Zandt is that this deep well of sadness was not an act. He was a man tormented by severe mental health issues and a lifelong battle with the bottle and harder substances, including the dark needle's promise of escape. For Townes, these things weren't about fueling a party or a rebellious image. They were a desperate attempt to quiet the noise in his own head. He lived a chaotic, nomadic life, often homeless, playing for whoever would listen. His performances were unpredictable. Some nights he was a genius, other nights he could barely stand. He became a cult hero, a songwriter's songwriter, beloved by those who knew that his heartbreaking art was completely authentic. Unlike others who found a way to step back from the edge, Townes seemed to walk it his entire life, believing that his creative muse was tied to his suffering. He passed away in 1997, at the age of 52, his body finally giving out after a lifetime of hard living, leaving behind a legacy of perfect, painful songs. 11. Johnny Paycheck. The outlaw spirit was about rebellion, but there was always a line between a rebellious image and real-world danger. Johnny Paycheck, a singer with a knack for crafting working-man anthems, famously crossed that line. He shot to stardom in 1977 with the smash hit Take This Job and Shove It, a song that perfectly captured the frustrations of blue-collar America. It made him a household name and a key figure in the outlaw movement. But Paycheck's real life was far more turbulent than his song suggested. He had a fiery temper and a long-standing struggle with the bottle and the Nashville party powder. This combination proved to be explosive. In 1985, he was in a bar in Ohio when he got into a heated argument with another man. Fueled by his habits and his anger, Paycheck made a terrible, life-altering choice. He pulled out a weapon and injured the other man. It wasn't a fatal encounter, but it was a shocking act of violence that landed him in a world of legal trouble. He was eventually convicted and spent time in prison. His story served as a stark reminder of the dark side of the outlaw persona. The rebellious attitude, when mixed with powerful substances, could curdle into genuine danger. Johnny Paycheck's career never fully recovered. He went from being a chart-topping star to a cautionary tale about what can happen when a country song's defiant lyrics spill over into real life with devastating consequences. While the men's struggles were often public, the women of country were fighting their own quiet wars. 12. The women of country's hidden battles. The world of country music has long been dominated by the stories of men. The tales of hard-drinking cowboys and rambling outlaws are central to the genre's mythology. But the women of country music have always been its backbone, and their struggles, though often less public, have been just as profound. For female artists, the pressures were different, and in some ways even greater. They were expected to be perfect wives and mothers while also being glamorous superstars, a nearly impossible balancing act. Loretta Lynn, the legendary coal miner's daughter, was one of the toughest and most honest songwriters in history. She wrote unflinchingly about the realities of a woman's life. But she also battled years of physical exhaustion and illness brought on by a relentless touring schedule that started when she was just a teenager. To cope, she relied on prescription pills given to her by doctors, which led to a hidden dependence that she later spoke about with her characteristic frankness. Other female stars have faced similar quiet battles, whether with alcohol, pills, or eating disorders, often suffering in silence for fear of damaging their good girl image. Their stories were not ones of bar fights and lawnmower escapades, but of a quiet, grinding struggle to hold everything together in a world that demanded they be everything to everyone. These hidden battles are a crucial part of the genre's history, revealing the immense cost of fame for the women who dared to claim a spot on the stage. 13. Steve Earle. By the late 1982nd and early 92nd, a new generation of artists emerged, inspired by the Outlaws but with a harder, grittier edge. At the forefront was Steve Earle, a Texas-born troubadour who blended rock and roll swagger with country storytelling. He was hailed as the next big thing, a brilliant songwriter with a powerful voice and a rebellious spirit. But as his star rose, he fell into a deep and destructive spiral with some of the most unforgiving substances available, including the city's escape in the form of a dark powder and its smokable, rock-like cousin. Steve Earle's battle was not a secret. It was a public and catastrophic fall from grace. He disappeared from the music scene for several years, lost in a haze of desperate need. He lost his home, his money, and nearly his life. His mugshot became more famous than his album covers. To many, it seemed like another brilliant talent would be lost forever, another casualty of the music world's dark side. But then, something incredible happened. After being arrested and given a choice between prison and recovery, Earle chose recovery. He got clean and mounted one of the most remarkable comebacks in music history. He returned with a renewed sense of purpose, his songwriting sharper and more profound than ever. His story became a powerful testament to the possibility of resurrection. He had been to the absolute bottom and clawed his way back, proving that even the hardest-core troubadour could find a road back from ruin. His journey brought the story of struggle into a new era. 14. Keith Urban. As country music entered the 21st century, it became a global phenomenon. The stars were now international celebrities, their lives splashed across the internet and tabloid magazines. The pressures evolved, but they didn't disappear. Keith Urban, a supremely talented singer and guitarist from Australia, became one of the genre's biggest new stars. With his pop-infused sound and charismatic stage presence, he seemed to have it all, but he was hiding a long-running battle with the bottle and the party powder. Keith's struggle was different from the Outlaws of the past. It played out in the full glare of the modern media spotlight. He had several stints in rehabilitation centers, with his journey to sobriety becoming a public narrative. His story was particularly impactful because it happened after he had achieved massive success and married a world-famous actress, Nicole Kidman. His willingness to speak openly about his relapses and his ongoing commitment to recovery represented a major shift in the culture of country music. He showed that addiction wasn't a problem of a bygone era or a sign of moral failure. It was a disease that could affect anyone, even a seemingly perfect superstar. His public fight and his ultimate success in maintaining his sobriety helped to destigmatize the issue for a new generation of artists and fans, proving that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. This modern perspective makes us look back on the entire history of the genre and ask a difficult question. 15. The legacy of pain. Looking back at the long, troubled history of country music, a persistent and uncomfortable question arises. Does great country music require great suffering? From the lonesome wail of Hank Williams to the raw honesty of George Jones and the poetic sadness of Townes Van Zandt, so much of the genre's most powerful art seems to be born from personal turmoil. The themes of heartbreak, loss, and redemption are not just tropes. They are the lived experiences of its greatest practitioners. It's easy to romanticize this connection, to believe that the artists had to live the blues to be able to sing the blues. But this romantic notion ignores the devastating human cost. For every Johnny Cash who found redemption, there is a Hank Williams or a Townes Van Zandt who did not. For every Steve Earle who came back from the brink, there are countless others whose careers and lives were cut short. The legacy of pain in country music is not a badge of honor, it is a tragedy. Thankfully, the culture is changing. Artists like Keith Urban and many others have shown that vulnerability can be a source of strength. The new generation is more willing to talk openly about mental health and the importance of seeking help. The hope is that future country stars will find a way to write songs that touch the soul without having to sacrifice their own in the process. The music's power comes from its honesty, and the new truth emerging from Nashville is that the most courageous act of all is not to suffer in silence, but to finally speak up.